Have you ever noticed that when nutrition scientists make recommendations about healthy diets, they focus on food? But diet books that achieve mega bestseller status usually focus on a component of food, either protein, fat, or carbs, at least in America. Peter Attia's runaway bestseller is focused on protein, like a lot of mega bestsellers past. Dr. Atkins' blockbuster was focused on carbs being bad and fat being good, like Gary Taubes' bestsellers. Dr. McDougall's starch solution and many before it were focused on carbs being good and fat bad. It's a whole different thing to write a best-selling diet book than it is to run a respected scientific study. I'm not aware of any scientists who run major studies who recommend diets on the extreme end of protein, fat, or carbohydrates. But because America is obsessed with protein, fat, and carbs, scientists do get charged with studying diets that focus on them. But here's the thing. It's not hard to compare diets in the short term about which one provides the quickest weight loss or the lowest readings in your blood glucose monitor, but cancer, diabetes, and heart disease take decades to develop, so it takes a 30-year study to understand those. And 30-year studies done well are very expensive and take a great scientific team to pull off. I have waited all my life for a good long-term study on low-carb diets because my father raised us on low-carb in the 50s and 60s when low-carb diets were all the rage before Atkins invented them in the 70s. And I've always wondered what the long-term effects were. So when this study came out showing that low-carb diets can either dramatically increase or slightly decrease your risk of getting type 2 diabetes, depending on which low-carb foods you choose, it immediately grabbed my attention. But here's the thing. I have a decent background in environmental epidemiology, but I can't fully understand a study like this in nutritional epidemiology without talking to the authors, and I'm not aware of any scientist who's not a nutritional epidemiologist who can. And that is a big dilemma if you're a YouTuber and you need to support your channel financially, because to get views, you have to interview names people recognize, usually best-selling authors like Peter Attia. For this study, no one has heard of lead author Binkai Liu or corresponding author Chi Sun because they're so busy doing science, they're not on social media and they don't write books. I'm really lucky because I don't need financial support for my expensive YouTube habit.
Yes, a very expensive passion, but we like to think that we can help people live longer, healthier lives. We also like to help the animals in the environment. If you'd like to help us, please subscribe and tell your friends.
Some people volunteer for animal shelters, some for food banks, some for medical missions. This is my volunteering for a cause I believe in. So I can pack up my camera gear, and my only worry is whether we're finding the most solid scientists and fully understanding their findings. It's not the path to fame and fortune like writing miracle diet books is. I know some of you are thinking, wait, isn't this study just observational epidemiology? You can't infer causality from that. Having come from environmental epidemiology, that is a line every corporation markets because they know epidemiology has the power to destroy their industry, as it has done for lead, asbestos, mercury, tobacco, trans fats, tanning beds, and for 100 other chemicals, food additives, and medications. But if you don't believe in epidemiology, you can stop worrying about those things. And I will see you after this interview with my conclusions. Well, thanks so much for coming.
Yeah.
It's a fascinating paper. What was the motivation to write a paper on that topic?
Well, we've always been interested in low-carb diet, and we are also interested in diabetes. And low-carb diet is just a very popular idea going on for decades. And we do have population data, really good validated data here. So we thought it would be good to look at the link there. But also we realized it's not just the quantity of the carbohydrate that matters. So we also want to look at different versions of low-carb diet, focusing on the food sources, plant versus animal, and also distinguish between good carb versus bad carb. So we created multiple versions of low-carb diet there and use our validated data to try to see the associations there.
So what's the general impression of the American public? It's that carbs cause diabetes?
Yeah, I think that's carb is I think has a complicated history in the United States because it used to be fat is the carbohydrate, right?
In the 80s we were obsessed with fat.
My teenager son and daughter, they say, oh, this is too much carb, I cannot eat this. So heavily influenced by the social media, it's necessary to understand how those kind of diets influence the human health. Right, regardless what the social media say, we need evidence to support whatever kind of saying.
Yeah, and also I think one thing that's missing in social media is the long-term effect of adhering to low-carb diet.
Right.
Most of those social media things focusing on the short-term weight loss benefits of low-carb diet, but we don't really know how people body respond to this kind of diet, whether it's sustainable in the long run and how it's good for your metabolic health in the long term.
Right.
And our data provides us a possibility to look at the link there.
I keep seeing studies where they will pit low fat versus low carb versus Mediterranean diet. And the low carb diet always seems to lose more weight in the first 6 months or so, and then it drifts back. Do we know why that is?
That's almost always the case, regardless what kind of weight strategy you talk about. It could be low fat, could be low carb. It's almost inevitable that for most of the trial, 6 months is the magic point. Before that, there's a constant weight loss. After that, that weight loss stopped and eventually going back to the baseline. When people start losing weight, they lose not only fat mass but also lean mass. When you lose lean mass, the body says, okay, this is really dangerous. The person start losing the lean mass, and I need to counteract that. So there's a mobilization of a hormone, whatever system working together to really reduce the resting metabolic rate, so on and so forth, so that eventually your appetite goes up, your metabolic rate drops, then eventually your body weight is back. It's not based on how people are willing to lose weight or keep that weight loss. It is beyond their will. It's a biology behind it, so it's really inevitable.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but
yeah, no problem.
That noise that you heard was a text tone from my wife because I forgot to put my phone on Do Not Disturb.
And
my text tone is, oh yeah, my baby's calling.
I love that.
Yeah.
I should interject to say this study is based on following about 200,000 medical professionals for over 30 years. We rarely see data like that in environmental epidemiology. Medical professionals know how to report their ailments accurately, and they take the study so seriously that in over 3 decades, less than 10% of them dropped out of the study. Why are your cohorts good to study this problem on and not a cohort of people who are on the ketogenic diet or have an extreme low-carb diet? Because am I wrong that the median intake of carbs on 1 quintile was only 37% of carbs? That was kind of the lowest, and the highest was 60%. So some people are going to say, this isn't a low-carb study. This is a study of nurses and health professionals who varied their carbs, but not to what we're talking about on the internet. They're not in ketosis. So why are your cohorts appropriate for this topic?
Well, so first of all, I think our cohorts represent free living individuals in the United States.
Good point.
So it's an observational study, so we don't force participants to eat a certain type of diet, so they can choose whatever they want to eat. And second, there isn't really a universally defined low-carb diet for the specific percentage of calories from carbs. So on average, Americans eat about 50% of their calories from carbohydrates, so I would say anything lower than that can be considered as low carb. And in the epidemiologic studies in the United States, a percentage from 30 to 40% will be considered as low carb diet. So our study design still fits into the general picture of the study on low carb diet.
And even in that range, you saw quite a bit of difference.
Exactly. And I think that delivers a clear message that quality matters a lot, even within that narrow range of carbohydrate intake, comparing those who had 37% to 60% of carbohydrate intake, those who emphasize on healthy proteins and fats and healthy carbs, they have much lower risk of diabetes compared to those who do not focus in on these healthy foods.
During the interview, Binkai and Chi explained why it's so hard to study extremely low carbohydrate diets. Here's the first reason.
In our data, there's very few people, about 250 individuals, who ever went on keto diet among our 200,000 people. So that's really small amount, right?
The second reason is that adherence is so low.
The vast majority of the carbohydrate is removed because you're eating a ketogenic diet. Most people couldn't really practice a ketogenic diet for a long run.
And adherence falls off.
Yeah, absolutely.
10 years ago, when keto diets were all the rage, startup Virta Health raised $373 million at a $2 billion valuation to provide keto recipes, tracking software, coaching, and an online support community for a monthly fee. They recruited 272 people with type 2 diabetes to follow their program and track them for 5 years. Their recipes were designed to keep them on the program, so they included yummy processed meats like bacon and ham. But after 2 years, even with all the support and the yummy recipes, only 14% of participants were able to keep their carb intake down to the recommended level. After 5 years, only 122 participants remained, and Virta provided very little information on what happened to the dropouts. Those who made it 5 years did lose a lot of weight in the first year, as happens with every restrictive diet if you can stick to it. But the weight came back over the next 4 years, and the diabetes came back even faster than the weight. And that was a study run by a company whose $2 billion valuation depended on a good outcome, so they lavished support on these participants. I think the fatal flaw of the Virta papers is they didn't report what people were eating, only the amount of carbohydrates they ate, a word they never defined. Did it mean white bread, potatoes, fruit, beans, broccoli? They didn't say. But this paper from Binkai and Chi was based on very detailed dietary data.
So the narrative online is FFQs. I can't remember what I ate on Friday, so these can't be reliable.
Whoops, for people watching at home, I should have explained that FFQs stand for Food Frequency Questionnaires. Virtually all social media influencers and some doctors have the intuitive sense they couldn't be accurate because they depend on human memory. But when I press influencers, it's very clear they don't know how they're designed, tested, or how accurate they really are. And they've never hosted an actual epidemiologist to find out. I asked a doctor, why do you place so much trust in pathologists and radiologists and not in epidemiologists who usually spend 12 years in very rigorous education? And the answer he gave is they know pathologists and radiologists because they went to med school together and they know what their training is. But epidemiologists are someplace else on campus, and their training involves a lot of rigorous math, which doctors don't get. I had an epidemiologist explain how FFQs are designed in another episode, but let's see what Chi says.
So for FFQs, it doesn't matter you recall what you eat on Friday or particular Saturday. For our FFQ, we ask participants to recall what your typical diet in the past 1 year.
Everybody can answer that, right?
Everybody can answer that. Everybody can process that question. We conducted many validation studies using different approach to say whether they report accurately about their diet. We use, for example, methods like diet records, which is a totally different method to assess diet. You have to write down when you eat that food, when you finish that cup of a drink, whatever it is, you need to write down. If you eat in restaurant, you need to tell me it is the name of the restaurant, what you order, what you did. That's really labor intensive. So that's why we can only do in a small group of really dedicated participants to give us that kind of data. We can also use objective biomarkers that do not rely on your recall, right? It doesn't matter whether your memory is accurate or not. And we use those kind of different approach to validate the FFQ. And we see, really impressive correlation between FFQ, what the FFQ assess versus what the diet record assess versus what the biomarker tell us. I think this is a really critical evidence to suggest that the FFQ on average really does a fantastic job. Having said this, does FFQ have a limitation? Absolutely yes. For questionnaire to prevent the fatigue of our participants. You couldn't ask them like 1,000 questions, right? Only,
140 is kind of the limit.
140, 130, that's how you can ask. You really couldn't ask, kind of the food items that relatively rarely consumed in this population.
And isn't part of it that the population is medical professionals like nurses, and they're responsible and they know how to answer these questions?
That's the strength.
Yeah, that's what I mean.
That's why in the first place we want to ask nurses and health professionals to join our cohorts.
So here's my question for you guys. There were 4 major groups. There was animal dominant low carbohydrate diet, there was the unhealthy, and then there was the plant and the healthy. And I was just wondering if you could briefly kind of help people separate each one of those categories.
Yeah, for the animal-based low-carb diet, it was the overall low-carb diet plus an emphasis on animal-sourced proteins and fats. And for the unhealthy version of low-carb diet, it was created based off the animal-based low-carb diet, but with further de-emphasis on whole grains and relatively healthy carbs, so we call it unhealthy low-carb diet. And for the vegetable-based low-carb diet, we emphasize on plant-sourced proteins and fats. Again, we do not look at the type of carbohydrates we are eating, but for the healthy version of low-carb diet, we further look at lower intake from refined grains. So for the healthy version of low-carb diet, it's a diet that's rich in protein and fats from plant-based sources, and also emphasize on intake of whole grains, legumes, nuts, that considered as carbohydrate sources.
And you lumped potatoes in with...
Unhealthy.
Unhealthy, yeah.
Yeah, so
Can you talk about
potatoes, white potatoes, fries, those are...
Are sweet potatoes exempted?
Exempted.
They
yes.
are?
Yeah, so white potatoes, they are associated with higher risk of type 2 diabetes.
Why is that? Because post-meal glucose spike is higher? Or?
Well, I would say the nutrient profiles between white potatoes and sweet potatoes are quite different. They're both starchy, but sweet potatoes have more fiber and more carotenoids. So generally considered healthy, and also according to the previous epidemiology studies, sweet potatoes were not so much associated with risk of type 2 diabetes, but white potatoes are associated with higher risk. And also, there are a lot of ways to cook white potatoes, making it less healthy. So in our study, we categorized white potatoes as relatively unhealthy carbs, even though they may not necessarily be refined carbs.
In the U.S. diet, in terms of the consumption level, potatoes absolutely overwhelm, other starchy vegetables.
Is that because of French fries?
I think it's still culture. In the U.S. culture, potatoes really play an important role.
This is the potato guide. I'm going to show you almost every way to make and cook one of the most beloved foods, potatoes. 43 total methods.
And like Binkai said, you mash potato, you have French fry. It's really, after those processing, potatoes become even worse.
So there's conversations online about, well, then just refrigerate your potatoes, because then you get resistant starch, and then you're good. It doesn't have the same metabolic effect. What do you say to that?
It is true that when you cook potato, then you put them into the fridge and cool them down, the resistant starch forms. That's absolutely true, and that resistant starch function almost like a fiber. However, that's not the typical way of consuming potato in this country. I mean, that part is absolutely true, in terms of the resistant starch.
So the mechanism is dead simple. When you cook a potato, the starch granules absorb water and turn into a gelatin that digests fast and spikes your blood sugar. If you put them in the fridge, they recrystallize, making them harder to digest, so a lot of them pass into your colon, making your microbiome throw up party. And the best news, most of those crystals survive reheating because it occurs over a very short amount of time. It's an amazing hack to turn potatoes and white rice into healthier foods and lower calorie foods, because now you're sharing the calories with the microbes in your gut.
So Chi, you were also a co-author on that paper on healthy dietary patterns in Nature that's gotten so much attention. It's everybody's favorite study now. It was pretty shocking with the heat maps to keep going down that heat map and see sugar-sweetened beverages, which I would have thought would be at the bottom or close to it, above meats, total meats, even red meat, unprocessed red meat. Red meat was worse. And total meats was below sodium, and the only thing it beat was trans fat. I hear this narrative all the time, I can't eat an Impossible Burger or Beyond Burger or something like that because that's processed food. But unprocessed red meat is worse.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I didn't see that coming at all. I stared at that heat map and thought, oh my gosh, what is that?
Something else that's related to this is the cooking methods, right?
Yeah.
The way you cook red meat will be different from the way you cook seafood or other plant-based proteins.
Unless you blacken it like if you're in New Orleans or something.
Yeah,
Blacken catfish.
Yes.
Yeah.
But in terms of red meats, there's also a lot of good biology suggesting why red meats are not healthy.
Like what? Like heme iron?
Like heme iron.
TMAO.
Don't forget saturated fat.
Yeah.
Right. That should be people's first reaction. That, when you talk about steak, my understanding is that for people to enjoy the steak, it has to be a little bit fatty, right? So that.
Well, we're breeding them that way, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they've changed completely over 50 years. So even if they eat grass, they're marbled.
My lab, hopefully we can generate more evidence regarding why meats are so detrimental for diabetes risk.
And what about the two of you? Are either of you vegan or vegetarian?
I'm not.
Epidemiologists that are involved in health or coming up with the dietary guidelines, they all seem to eat a little bit of animal food. Is that because you believe the diet is a little bit healthier?
To me, I don't know, Binkai, you can talk about your experience. My experience is that this is absolutely culture-based because, in my culture, people tend to eat really a variety of things.
Yeah. Were you Chinese?
I'm Chinese, yeah.
Chinese. You're both Chinese.
Yeah, I stayed in China in the first 30 years of my life. So my dietary habits are already formed. However, having said this, I prefer skim milk added to my morning coffee. That's my primary dairy. I eat yogurt. I love to eat seafood, fish, shrimp, a little bit chicken, but rarely, other kind of animal products.
Same with you?
Well, I would say that my diet also a little culture-based, but I'm a big foodie, so I love exploring different options.
Yeah.
So
this is a younger generation.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I can see some food maybe not as healthy as, and I don't really need them, but I would like to try them because they make me happy.
Oh, I see.
Eating is not just about making your physical health better, it's also making your mental health better.
Sure. So what would be an indulgence for you?
I still prefer fresh fruits.
Fresh fruit. That's an indulgence?
Well, that's a really hard question, to be honest, because some people asked me about this before, what do I want to eat when I'm sick? And I said, something refreshing, something that reminds me I'm existing in this world, not something like highly processed.
So I have asked that question to dozens of actual nutrition scientists over the years, including 2 over 100 years old. And all of them gave similar answers about their love of food. The count is 1 vegan, 1 vegetarian, and all the rest eat the way all the dietary guidelines around the world suggest. You get somewhat different answers if you ask environmental epidemiologists, because they fear the chemical pollutants that end up in such high concentrations in animal tissue because of bioaccumulation. So they narrow their fish choices, for example, if they eat any fish at all. But earth scientists answer that they're far more likely to give up all animal food because they study what nutrition scientists don't have time to study. For example, in California, we have 1.7 million dairy cows, and each one emits 150 pounds of feces per day. That load of crap doesn't get processed in the same way as human crap does. It gets spread over farmers' fields, causing nitrate contamination of water wells and elevated cancer rates among farmers. And that's just one environmental disaster involving dairy. So while nutrition scientists point out that low-fat dairy has solid data to show that it's generally healthy, earth scientists typically say they would never touch it. Fortunately, nutrition scientists have also shown that soy milk is on a par with low-fat dairy for overall health, and very fortunately, Tony has figured out how to make soy yogurt easy peasy in the Instapot. I'll make a YouTube short about that.
Why do Asian Americans, Eastern Asian Americans, live 7 years longer in America than white, Hispanic, or black Americans do?
I think that's a really complicated question.
Is food culture one of the big things?
I think gene, we have to talk about, certain traits.
But diabetes is soaring in China, isn't it? Isn't it like at 10% now?
10%,
So
10%
that doesn't sound
prevalence.
genetic. It sounds like American food made it to China and they're eating red meat now. Well, here's what I think it is, and you tell me where I'm wrong, because I'm not Chinese. I think you have a strong food culture, for one thing. You eat more slowly, with chopsticks and things. You eat in a group.
Slower.
You're more family oriented.
Yes,
and
that's true.
you walk after you eat. It's a
Right.
social activity.
Right.
And you have this mantra of, what is it called, where you only eat till you're 80% full. Do you still practice that? You don't overeat like we Americans do.
My mom always told me that everything you just said, walk after the dinner, slow down when you eat. I try to practice those.
So the question is about the cause of type 2 or causes of type 2 diabetes. I heard Roy Taylor say the blood glucose monitor, the patch, is good to see if you have diabetes, but it's not good to know what's going on under the hood. So what causes diabetes?
That's really a $1 million question. I think genetics absolutely. On top of that, I think excess body weight. That's really one leading risk factor for type 2 diabetes. But, a lot of factors can just interact. For example, some of the genetics predictors for diabetes do that through promoting the body weight gain.
But red meat is associated with diabetes.
Diet is another factor that's really complicated because diet can promote excess weight gain.
So once again, I'm well below your pay grade, but my inclination was to say when you eat a lot of red meat with butter on it and everything else, got a lot of saturated fat, TMAO, whatever all those things are, no, your blood glucose doesn't spike, but the buildup of liver fat is associated with that. So the blood glucose monitor, that one measurement is not telling you
Right.
what's going on under the hood because you don't know what's happening to your liver fat. You also need another patch that says, this is how much liver fat I'm getting from this meal.
Right.
Because that is a major causal factor of diabetes, right?
Right.
Am I wrong about that?
No, you're not wrong. The liver fat, the connection between the liver function, liver fat with diabetes is also very established. But it's not that easy to measure liver fat. That's the problem.
You have to do an MRI, right?
You have to do CT, MRI, those kind of stuff to even quantify the liver fat accurately. I think what the CGM does is help people understand whether you are sensitive to certain foods or not. I'm wearing now, right now. It does do a good job to tell individual what kind of food you may be mindful about when you consume it.
Yeah, I heard Rich Rolls say he was sensitive to bananas. They spiked his blood sugar.
To me,
they didn't spike my blood sugar.
Oatmeal and whole wheat bread are absolutely fine. I'm Chinese. I love to eat dumpling. Typically, you use refined flour to make the wrap. That causes a strong spike of blood glucose. So to me, I think that's absolutely big no-no for me. When it comes to dumpling, unless I use the whole grain flour to make the wrap. Otherwise, I shouldn't eat that stuff.
I was going to ask about oatmeal because it's a little bit high on the glycemic index score, isn't it?
Yeah.
I like to have oatmeal, but I practice this. I'll eat half the bowl, wait 15 minutes, eat the other half the bowl, and then go walking afterwards for 15 minutes. And my blood sugar can go up to 140 if I just eat the whole bowl with a spoon and, go like that. I typically wake up with my glucose is around 82 or something like that. But then having the oatmeal, if I wolf it down and it goes to 140, I think, I don't know about that. But when I eat half the bowl, it goes to maybe 110. Then I eat the other half of the bowl, it's back at 110 again. Then I go walking and it's back to 95 or something.
So that's why you need to eat slowly, huh?
That's why I need to be like the Chinese.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of individualized response. If your blood glucose does not increase after consuming the whole grain, that's even
Doesn't
whole
that
grain.
mean your pancreas is working, everything's
Right,
working,
exactly.
and you're healthy?
Exactly.
So, it's a sign of health, I would have thought.
It's really the extent of the spike rise and comes down, how quickly it does. That matters. But in terms
other
of
words, if it doesn't come down quickly, that's a risk factor. If it does come down quickly, it's less of a risk factor?
You know, this is complicated. For example, even you are insulin sensitive, when you eat refined carbohydrate, you see a really strong spike very quickly, and insulin kicks in and drops too much.
I see.
Then trigger the hunger, and you prefer to eat more. So that's the problem. So that's why even if you are still insulin sensitive, you shouldn't eat that. To give you a really long-term bad consequence, you know, quickly rise and sharply drop. That's the worst shape of curve you want to see. But after whole grain, typical curve is that you have a slow, but a less dramatic rise, and the slow go back to the baseline. Then you wouldn't give this kind of really deep drop.
So I have heard all my life that exercise is not that important for weight loss, but it is extremely important for keeping the weight off for some reason. This paper had a discussion about the time-varying BMI they were seeing among some of the participants over the 30 years they followed them, and it felt important because we've all heard that yo-yo dieting is no bueno for long-term health. But I couldn't fully grok what they were saying in the paper, something about fat overshooting, and that is exactly why I chased them down, because who better to understand their data than them?
And for the time-varying BMI, so we have data of repeatedly measured BMI, and we did account for that in our analysis to see whether the diet respond to the weight change or whether it's independently associated with diabetes risk. And specifically for people who their BMI is under 30, they respond more to the unhealthy version of low-carb diet.
Why was that? I saw that in the paper. I didn't know why that was.
Because
so people who have BMI over 30 are already on an unhealthy diet?
That's one possibility. And the other possible explanation is that for people who are leaner, they start low at their risk. So even small changes in their diet towards the unhealthy side will shift their insulin sensitivity and increase their risk of diabetes, possibly.
So you asked a question regarding what we observed for the bad low carb diet, why they are associated with the risk of developing diabetes, especially among lean individuals. On top of what Binkai just said, I want to add that sometimes people try to lose weight through eating a low-carb diet. For obese people to lose weight, we do have research demonstrate that for obese people who lose weight, regardless the strategy you use to lose that 10 pounds or more, that's almost universally beneficial for obese people to lower their risk of developing diabetes. That makes sense. For lean people, however, that's really a different story. It's true that even for lean people, there are quite a proportion of people, when they have a BMI lower than 25, they still try to lose weight. We have research demonstrating when lean people are trying to lose weight, unless that the strategy is through exercise. Other strategies like a dieting, like a commercial weight loss program, or drug loss, kind of pills, weight loss pills. Regardless strategy, when you lose 10 or more pounds, those individuals actually, in comparison with their counterparts who are still lean but did not try to lose weight, they have higher risk of developing diabetes.
Wow.
They lose weight, but when they regain the weight, they gain fat mass faster than the lean mass. They wouldn't stop gaining the fat mass unless they regain all the lean mass they lost initially. So this is called fat overshooting. So that explains when lean people try to lose weight, they not only lose fat mass, they also lose lean mass. And after 6 months after that, they regain weight, they regain actually more fat mass than before. Then they lost. So they become fatter after the weight loss attempt. So this is really a caution I want to put there to warn people who are lean, keep that status, but do not attempt to lose weight. If you have to lose weight, exercise. That's the only way to healthfully
because you maintain your lean mass.
Maintaining the mass, absolutely. Yeah.
Push-ups.
Yeah, push-ups. I think that's perhaps one of the reasons why we observe what we observed.
So, my conclusion, I have to confess that I came to this paper with a very negative attitude about low-carb diets based on how popular they were in the 50s and 60s when I was growing up. My family got swept away by them and got heart disease, diabetes, and cancer and barely made it to 70. These are the kind of books we had around the house. The Low Carbohydrate Cookbook from the Culinary Arts Institute, the Low Carbohydrate Air Force Diet, the Low Carbohydrate Gram Counter, claiming this is the fabulous diet that everyone is talking about. Low-carb diets have been around for over 100 years, and either I missed the memo or no one has found a population that lives long on these diets. No wonder Norway has right on its website that keto and paleo diets are extreme health fads. However, papers like this one from Binkai and Chi have changed me. I do not like anecdotes, but I'll tell one that was driven by the following data. Harvard has been publishing charts like this one for years. It shows that fats from nuts, seeds, salmon, and oils dramatically improve mortality and lower LDL compared to the carbs most Americans eat. I know, the oils are not intuitive because they're refined and the internet is losing its mind over them. But I'm not aware of any nutrition scientists who doubt how healthy they are. I've had terrible blood tests for years, like my parents and sisters had. In the past, I was persuaded by Dean Ornish's impressive but small and short-term heart studies, but I simply couldn't get either cholesterol or triglycerides in a safe range even though I was eating no processed food except soy milk. So I added avocados, nuts, and some oils into my diet, nuked the potatoes, and my LDL went from about 150 to 55, and triglycerides from 250 to 81. There are no medications that can do that. Over the past few years, I've been contacted by maybe a half dozen vegans on very low-fat diets who were surprised to hear from their doctors that they may need a stent or bypass operation. Yikes. And their blood tests were not looking good. I responded, I'm not a doctor, but you could try Harvard's recommendations and see what happens. And so far, my merry little band is seeing blood test improvements on a par with mine. This shouldn't surprise anyone because it's the Mediterranean diet, which is the gold standard for all healthy Western countries. So yeah, I do believe that a somewhat low-carb diet can be very healthy. It's just not the way that most Americans are eating low-carb diets. And that brings me back to what the 114 dietary guidelines that I've been able to identify do. They focus on food. When they do mention fat, carbs, and protein, they tell us to avoid the extremes. To my knowledge, that's what all longevity data supports.
Binkai, you have the risk of being known as the Queen of Darkness because everybody's favorite food, red meat, your paper keeps exposing red meat, but you kind of made up for it with your study on chocolate. If I understood the conclusion right, I'm not predisposed to diabetes eating 100% dark chocolate. Is that right?
With just the chocolate, no.
Do I get extra points for 100%?
Yeah. if you can eat that.
I like it.
Bitter, isn't it?
I like it.
Bitter.